I am Emma Ressel. I'm an artist and a photographer. I'm originally from Bar Harbor, Maine. I grew up in Maine, and now I'm a grad student in photography at UNM, and I'm an emerging artist member at Strata Gallery this year. I'm somebody who's always been really preoccupied with biodiversity loss, and I think it has something to do with the place I grew up in, like living in sort of like a town that's like an entry to a national park, I think has this like connection to this natural resource and the biodiversity that live there. So I've always been kind of like hyper tuned in to the non-human species around me, at least in the town I'm from. I grew up right on the edge of Acadia National Park. My dad is a biologist, and he taught biology for 29 years at the local college. Before Google Images, he would go out and he would catch the frogs and the salamanders and the animals that he was teaching about in class and make photos of them. And occasionally I would help him out. So I would be in charge of like positioning a lizard on a rock for my dad to make a photo. And some of these like early experiences with animals, with photography, being out in the world and composing photographs are really coming back around in the work I'm making now. My work now is really thinking about the relationship between photography and dioramas and dead animals and preserved animals, and how I can like look at some of these collections and interpret something about the relationship between like humans and our environment, and how we relate to animals and kind of draw them closer through like the institutions of natural history. I think of taxidermy as kind of this look backwards into time, into sort of like these old, outdated methods of science or these outdated methods of experiencing nature. And then I think of like the research specimens as looking forward. We're kind of looking for answers. There isn't this display component to animals preserved for science, which is really interesting to me right now. I'm really curious about the current collecting that's happening, researchers going out and on visits into the field and collecting species that they are studying, and then processing those species, those specimens for very specific research. A challenge that biology has is communicating the complexity of these topics to an audience. And I'm really curious about like how art and photography can step into that place of communication, because I think it is a challenge, and I don't think of my photographs as explaining something more effectively. I think of my photographs as more so conveying the complexity and conveying the intermingling of loss, but also life and beauty and death, and like all of these things that are happening as we do research and try to engage with animals in this way. I'm really curious about this question of like what's coming, like what can we expect, what are things going to be like, like in my lifetime or in my generation's lifetime, and things like that. And I think I don't know what it's going to look like. I'm really curious about the unknowns of what we are facing in terms of environmental change and extinction and biodiversity loss. And part of that not knowing and that wondering is a place I'm really trying to linger in and kind of imagine. I think of the work I'm making now as like using or like photographing old animals, some of which have been taxidermied for 100 years, but in the backdrops I use, in the images I pull in the tableaus I make, I want to say something about like, kind of my awe and curiosity about the futures. My process is, my process begins with setting up the camera. The ground glass on the back of the camera is about 4 inches by 5 inches, so I have a pretty large image area to be able to see while I'm working. So the first step is setting up the camera, focusing it, getting my setting right, and then I start to like pull in the animals, pull in the backdrops, and kind of build the tableau, or I think of them as also temporary dioramas. I build it, looking through the camera so it's specifically for the perspective of the lens. And to me, that's really similar to a diorama in a natural history museum, in that there's like the position that the audience, that the viewer or the visitor is going to stand and look at the diorama. And there are methods of kind of shaping the perspective and the kind of space of the diorama to fit that viewpoint. It is an old technology that's been around for forever. It's very analog, and to me that is important to kind of speak to the past and speak to the eras in which taxidermy were relevant and used. Using this camera also allows me to get incredible detail and to be able to print the images quite large if I want to, which is important to me on occasion as well. This show at Strata is my first opportunity to show this project at this scale in almost its entirety. I am really excited to create a pretty immersive environment. My hope with this work is to kind of envelop people in this kind of fictional world that I've created. There's a lot of layering that goes into my images in the photographing process, with layering backdrops and animals and things like that. And then there's also going to be this element of layering in the exhibition. So I will have some floor-to-ceiling prints that kind of act as these sort of like setting the scene landscapes, on which these uncanny animals are existing. I'm framing my images at, really varying sizes. Some are quite large, some are quite small, and that sort of dynamic range, I want people to, on occasion, have to stand back and really feel their bodies kind of like enveloped in this scene. And then I also want people to have to go up really close to see a little insect in a small print or something like that. I think of this work as hopefully quite immersive. I'm also building all my frames for this show. I'm really specific about my framing. I used to work at a gallery doing framing, and I'm really conscious of how the frame and the photograph speak to each other. I'm building all my own frames from white oak and ash, and I am in the wood shop cutting them to the exact dimensions I want. And the look that I'm going for is almost a little box, a little diorama. There's some depth, in the frame, or the image is slightly set back. And so I'm hoping that the frames also speak to these these like boxes and containers that these animals are more often than not stored in. This show at Strata feels like a really exciting culmination of my ideas and my work from the past 4 years. As I'm preparing for this show, I'm also thinking about what's next. The truth is, I don't really know what's next. What's next is photography. Right now, I'm starting to use a lot more cameras. The work that I'm showing in this exhibition is mostly large format color film, and my process of making these images is quite slow and meticulous, and I am excited to experiment in the future with some more gestural, like fast-paced ways of making images, so experimenting with new cameras. Right now I'm using some game cams to see if I can capture animals walking through my backyard, or through the woods or something like that. So I know that this topic of animal preservation and kind of looking forward, and then also the component of like how we as humans or individuals or young people, like how is this hitting us? How are we feeling about these changes? That's also something I really want to, tie in going forward. I'm a bit of a pessimist. I think that it's not going to be great. I think that we are in for some really scary changes, which often freaks me out, and I can get a little bit, worried about the future. But I also think that a tool I'm trying to develop is keeping that sense of awe about the changes that are coming, because I think there's also going to be some very interesting shifts that we can observe, through studying the way that species are adapting and things like that, to kind of continue the sense of commitment to the environment and commitment to a very quickly changing environment.